politely obey whatever commands are issued by government officials in the face of the state of emergency. This is what happened in the United States in the wake of 9/11. This is what happened in France after the Paris terrorist attacks. And this is certainly what happened in Poland in the first months, especially, of the COVID-19 pandemic, where many citizens simply accepted that whatever government is doing is necessary and that there is no other way but to comply.
This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.
Hi guys, this is Common Sense Generation, and we're back to the topic of the state of emergency. With me is Dr. Maciej Wilmanowicz, intellectual historian. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thanks.
You claim something very unique, that right now in modern times we live in a permanent state of emergency.
Well, it's actually the permanent state of exception.
The permanent state of exception.
Yes, and I think it's first of all, it's not my claim, and it's not unique at all. That's a claim that's been put forth by no other than the most famous Italian philosopher, I think, of the 21st century, Giorgio Agamben. Sure.
Poor one, he went through a pandemic with heartbroken, I would say.
Yes. Well, of course, his comments and observations and derogatory remarks concerning especially the victims of the COVID-19 pandemic and the way that he thought or thinks that the Italian state dealt with the threat arising from the pandemic have, in my view, been correctly criticized. But that does not diminish the value of his analysis from the legal and philosophical standpoint. And of course, his claim is developed over many well-researched and very philosophically deep books, is that what we are currently facing is, in fact, the permanent state of exception. And the way he actually tries to explain what he means by that is very revealing, I think, especially when we think about the legal aspect of how how the legal aspect and the way that we are trying to regulate what we think is an emergency is directly tied to our social mentality, how it influences our most basic social landscape, how we react to changes, what kind of expectations we form towards the state, how willing we are to actually follow whatever it is that the government demands us to do.
Isn't it from the fact that we are very much used right now that the government should resolve all our problems?
Yes.
That whatever happens or occurs, it should be some sort of rule, it should be regulated with some sort of law. And then we found ourselves in the moment that we all want all our life to be centrally regulated by the central government, which is very much against the rule of subsidiarity, which is actually part of common sense, that we should resolve our local problems on the most local level. And then whatever bad happens, then yes, the central government come to our aid, help us, us helpless children who don't want to take any form of risk or actions.
Yes, well, that's the idea of riskless society, right? And the idea of all-encompassing sphere of legal reference and the big brother or big godlike figure that's above us, and that's the state.
That's the state.
That will always be there to provide for us and to rescue us from any danger.
But isn't it that the legal system is growing to such extent that no one can be actually analyze it and use it even and learn everything about it. So we start to live in this ocean of legal system to find its way out, but it doesn't really provide the most basic rules.
Well, there are 2 points here. One is a rather nasty joke that is commonly, or not so commonly, but it is known within legal circles. What we are dealing with is a legislative diarrhea. So we are constantly facing the incessant onslaught of new regulations that only true professionals can.
I think this is the title of this interview.
I'd rather not have it.
Legal diarrhea.
Yeah, legislative.
Diarrhea, beautiful.
Yes, and the other point is that I think is quite interesting is to try to analyze social responses to what is perceived as a real state of emergency on a very specific timeline. Because what you usually find out when you do that is that the initial response of the citizenry is to politely obey whatever commands are issued by government officials in the face of the state of emergency. This is what happened in the United States in the wake of 9/11. This is what happened in France after the Paris terrorist attacks. And this is certainly what happened in Poland in the first months, especially, of the COVID-19 pandemic, where many citizens simply accepted that whatever government is doing is necessary and that there is no other way but to comply. But when
there were those few rebels who...
Yes, of course, that is second part of the equation, and the sheer number of people who questioned the logic behind many regulations imposed by the state tended to grow as more time lapsed from the, let's say, informal introduction of the state of emergency, and as more and more knowledge was actually provided to the citizenry regarding both the underlying causes of the pandemic, the ways to fight it, and also the proportionality, what you would call a proportionality of our government responses to the threat we are facing. And I think that's where the sense or the notion of common sense is actually very, very useful, because it turns out that the societal pressure, the public discussion that is taking place, is very important. And we are fortunate enough to live in liberal democracies where the force of public opinion really does bear on the decisions taken by the government. And of course, there is this tremendous pressure of social media and traditional media also. But still, many decisions that are taken by the officials are very often taken with one eye on the threat and the other eye fixed on opinion polls. So as long as the society can maintain what we would call a common sense and try to interact with its own government in such a way as to efficiently communicate what it thinks is the appropriate response, then those most absurd aspects or most absurd regulations can be held in check. And I think that this is, in fact, the only way to provide the government with a much-needed reality check.
This reality check is especially necessary in this moment of inflation of all the regulations, but it also proves us back to things. One is that we cannot be fully dependent on the state. And when we are fully dependent on the state in this inflation of, let's say, even the ideas of human rights, which also inflated to the human right of being happiness, the human right of getting married, so let state find me a spouse, or many other ridiculous things which happen through Europe and the Western world in different phases and forms. And the other thing is that I think this is the threat and the fear of death, which sometimes takes us so far away in accepting the rule of the state that we want to give up most of our freedoms, and very often it has absolutely opposite outcomes. Because after all, in the end, we as citizens, we of the individuals know the best what is necessary for us. And this answer is, I think, different with every individual. And the state can provide some legal frames and so especially protect us from the danger of outside. But what's within, that very often should be regulated by ourselves, but it's not, because we don't want to take this responsibility, isn't it?
Well, I think it all boils down to the question, what is it that constitutes the common good? And can it be actually negotiated on a societal level? Who decides? What are the criteria of common good? And within our liberal societies, well, the natural response of an average citizen would be to say that the common good is just me enjoying my own individual rights and liberties with no unnecessary state interference. So peace, prosperity, leisure. But when confronted with real state of emergency, what you have to actually try to explain, find an answer to, is the very hierarchy of your values. So is life, and that's one of the Agamben's claims, is life the most valuable part of our current normative framework? Are we really willing to give up everything? Political rights of, freedom of movement, our civil rights, just to preserve life itself, the sheer naked life, bare life, as Agamben would call it. Well, if it's so.
Funny thing is that the answer for the same question by the same group is different in a different debate. In the pandemic debate, it was yes, we should protect life at any cost. But in the abortion debate, it's different. When we say the very same people, the very same groups answer, no, life is not the biggest value, freedom is the biggest value. The choice of the freedom of women, personal choice, and then to the same problem. Of course, regarded in a different way, because this is the life in a different state, but in fact, to the core, the same question.
Well, the argument here would be that this is not a real life.
Yeah, that would be the main argument.
Yeah,
of course.
yes. So yes, that would be the gist of the argument here. But yes, as I said, it all boils down to the criteria that enable you to actually define the common good. And when you think about, for instance, the current crisis on the borders of the European Union, whether on the shores of Italy, Greece, Spain, or on the borders of Poland and Lithuania,
and Belarus.
And Belarus, yes, you are confronted with a pressing question: is the common good of our localized community. And this is also an important point. Every time that we speak about the state of emergency or exceptional circumstances, it is usually or virtually always related to our community, to our localized community, not to the state of emergency that encompasses the whole world. Granted,
because on the other hand, how can you cannot protect rights of the people all over the world.
Of course.
It's impossible. You can protect rights only within the framework of state. Without the state and without the border of the state, you cannot provide it. Then we have this form of chaos.
Yes, but there are complex issues at play here. So first of all, for instance, let's take the Polish example. Poland is a signatory state of many international regulations that impose many obligations on us with regards to, let's say, the political asylum seekers that are trying to get across the border into the safety of the European Union. But many states, including Poland, including the United Kingdom, find that it is, in practice, very difficult to, at the same time, respect all the obligations arising from the international regulations and to efficiently counteract what is perceived as the state of emergency.
And to protect their own citizens, of course.
Yeah.
So this is this question, whose rights are more important?
Yeah.
And in practice,
which is a tragic one, admittedly. But it's one that every single government, especially one that is dependent on the political will and the political opinion of its citizens, has to ask itself and has to resolve in one way or another. There's no escaping of it. And also, there's I just thought about the example of immigration, not the illegal one, but the let's say ordinary immigration that is grown into a serious societal and economic level in France and Germany, and many people
in UK.
In the UK, yeah. But so, if you were to define, for instance, the common good, one of the criteria of the common good would be to have a consistently unified in terms of religion, your nation, that to be consistent in terms of culture, in terms of political stance, in terms of religion, then what your vision of the common good would require you to do, or would logically force you to conclude, is that people who are refusing to play by the rules, people who are of different denomination, of different religion, of different culture, radically different, and that do not accept the normal functioning of your state, of your institutions, rule of law, are actually creating a sort of internal state of emergency. And that is, of course, heavily dependent on your vision of what constitutes the common good. Because in different theories, you would have, especially on the left side, but also many liberals would claim that actually what the common good demands is to create a multicultural, tolerant type of society. So you have two extremely opposite types of conceptualizing what it is that constitutes.
Yes, but then you come to also all of those forms of paradox. On one hand, you want to protect the rights of, for example, women in UK, and but on the other hand, if you want to be so tolerant to all the cultures then and different ways of life, then you have the exception of women's circumcisions, which happen among Muslim societies and groups. And as we know, London becomes the biggest hub of such kind of operations on women, which in the face of the law, of British law, is after all a form of
mutilation, basically.
Exactly, a paradox.
Well, I think it's. I think, although I'm not sure, but I think it's called a Bückenfreude dilemma. This is the name of a German academic who actually described it, you could say, that there is an inherent paradox in liberal democracies, and the very essence of it is that the very principles that we enshrine in our constitutions, the very values that we cherish the most, are also the very same ones that are allowing our liberal constitutional systems to wither away. So basically, we are preparing our own destruction, our own doom, you could say.
Because as I finally realized, but the fact is, those are mainly problems of the Western world. For example, Chinese government doesn't have this huge debate: should white people sit in the Chinese government? There is no such vocation. Could you imagine that the vice prime minister of China would be a black woman?
Yeah, well, that's of course a heritage of colonialism and of many strains of.
I know, of course, a huge background behind it.
Yes.
But just to give this vivid image of that, very often a lot of those paradoxes, problems, and debates we put on ourselves. We put on ourselves, and we challenge ourselves with them within the democracies, and they are also possible within the parliamentary democracies, because such debate isn't even possible in Saudi Arabia, and such debate is also not possible in China.
Well, sure, that is the curse and the blessing of actually being a citizen of the Western liberal democracy. Everyone can voice their opinions, everyone can act in the way that seems most suitable to them, and that creates a variety of problems, of course. But I think none of us would, trade our places with a citizen of Saudi Arabia, let's say.
Depends on which level you are. If you are a prince, there. But I guess there's a lot of stress as well if you're a sheikh.
Well,
or a sheikh's wife.
Well, okay, maybe my generalization was a bit too broad. I can speak only for myself. I wouldn't trade places with anyone from all who lives in those states where it is not possible to have this conversation.
If you wake up tomorrow in the shoes of Xi Jinping, what would be your decision?
My first decision, I have no idea.
And then we find out that Dr. Maciej Wilmanowicz is actually a cruel dictator. Even making it harder.
Well, if the history of the Second World War and the atrocities committed during this conflict teach us anything, then it's that, well, when certain set of circumstances arise, even normal people, so-called normal people who in different circumstances would never even think of being capable to commit such atrocities, can quickly realize
and do it. Absolutely.
And do it, yes.
Back again, this vocation. I mean, this call that whenever you picturize the German concentration camp, then you always should project yourself not as a prisoner,
but as a guard.
But as a guard.
Yeah. What would you do? Would you follow the order?
And we leave you, the viewers of Common Sense Generation, with this open question: what would you do as a guard in the concentration camp? It's always a good question to answer to yourself, just to know your own heart. Thank you very much for watching our show. We do hope that you are part of the generation of common sense. And I thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible.
This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.